we've got James in Maine, who's or sorry, Minnesota. Pronouns are he, him.
Minnesota.
James, a pantheist who wants to talk about Jesus existing. So welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, James.
So, hello, David. Hello, Matt.
Hey there.
So,
Hi.
I saw the title being "Is Jesus Real?" And I wasn't sure whether or not my call would be topical to that, because it's sort of halfway a critique of David as well. I don't know if we want to get into pantheism or not. If you want to, that's fine.
Let's approach it from the Jesus question and go from there.
Yeah, so my criticism of David wasn't really from the Jesus question, but I can call about Jesus being, because I said it, I'm not sure if this was topical. Anyway, let me just state my case. So I basically agree with David's thesis. Any defense of a historical Jesus is going to have to produce evidence that there was, in fact, a historical Jesus. If we don't have evidence of anything, I believe, like Hume, that we shouldn't believe it. And it's the same in this case. All of the so-called evidence for historical Jesus ends up being plagiarisms, rewrites of Old Testament stories, mythologies, interpolations. There's nothing concrete. So none of it should be believed. And so I'm 100% in accord with David on that.
And I love that, because it's not that there's no evidence for Jesus, but there's not a lot of good evidence for Jesus. And there's a lot of evidence against Jesus. Yeah. So I appreciate you making that distinction.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a little bit of social anxiety, so it's a little bit hard.
You're doing great.
I'm not even talking. Nobody should be anxious if I'm not yelling.
It's just me. It's just my anxiety. It's not your fault.
No, I get it. I apologize, James. I'm just having fun with it. I think that one of the problems, though, is that, let's say, the time to believe something is when there's sufficient evidence for it. And that's just a normative element of establishing a burden of proof. And so you can have default positions that are baseline presuppositions, essentially that we're going to presume you're innocent until we prove you're guilty. And if we fail to prove you guilty, we're going to determine that you're not guilty. But we're not going to determine that you're innocent. And what I see happening with mythicism, and this is what I talked about at the top of the show, is that there's a really great case to be made that we don't see the evidence we would expect to see if, in fact, this were the case. And we see all this other evidence that is consistent with myth building and narrative, storytelling and these other things. And so, therefore, I agree, like I said at the outset, the Christians are in a position where they can demonstrate the truth of Jesus' existence. But to assert Jesus did not exist, which David and I talked about, is not necessarily co-equal to mythicism, but it tends to get lumped in there, is a mistake, like walking into court saying, I can prove I'm innocent. Because if the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove that you're guilty, and they fail, you go scot-free. If you walk in and say, not only can you not prove that I'm guilty, I can prove I'm innocent, you better be correct, because if you aren't able to establish a rock solid confirmation that you are innocent, that is going to correctly or incorrectly bias everybody that you are now more likely to be guilty, because you attempted to prove your innocence in a way that doesn't. So, I mean, that's where we're right back to where I was at the beginning. So
perfect.
And again,
so I would just retort. Go ahead, Fitz. I don't mean to.
I'll just go down a rabbit hole and we'll lose you completely. So let's not do that.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So my response to that is similar to a response someone levied once and told me that science doesn't prove things. Science proves things false, but science doesn't prove things true. And I disagree with that. I think that's just a mistaken view. Science has proven that there is no flat Earth, right? Because there's so much evidence for the fact that Earth is not flat, that flat Earth is rejected on that basis, right?
Yeah.
That is how we know flat Earth is not the case. Science does prove things true, right? And so in similar fashion, it comes down to historical methodology. I just hold the view, and I think this is demonstrably shown if you just think about it for a few minutes, the absence of evidence is evidence absent. Right?
It can be.
We know that
I've said before countless times, absence of evidence is evidence for absence when evidence would be expected. But absence of evidence is not in and of itself confirmation of absence.
I concur with my colleague.
Right, and I agree 100%. And that's exactly why we round up, just in terms of probability, that Jesus is more likely not to exist. And that's why Carrier comes to the conclusion he comes to. And I do as well.
Well, Rick does, uses Bayes' theorem analysis to try to do this. The problem that I have with that is, like, Bayes' theorem is wonderful for statistical analysis in things like medicine, where you have multiple trials and tons of data. Bayesian analysis, I think, is useless when evaluating the origin of the universe, because we have exactly one universe and you don't have a data set and your prior is going to be problematic. I also think that the Bayesian analysis is going to be problematic when assessing the probability that a specific individual existed somewhere in the past, because the most even what was Rick come out with, like 70 some odd or 80 some odd percent that he didn't exist?
Well, he depending on how generous he is to granting the prior probabilities and steel manning it rather than straw manning it. If you go with the very, very best, it's 1 in 3. But if you ask him what he thinks is plausible, it's like 1 in 12,000.
Yeah.
I
want to point out something. Yeah. I want to point out that I actually think Richard Carey is way too generous, and we can go through that if we want to.
Yeah. No, he knows it. It's a rhetorical.
That was the point. You don't write a massively thick volume like Proving History as a precursor to building up your case about Jesus and then fail to be overly generous, because you can be very generous and it still comes out where Jesus' existence is at best dubious. It's interesting. Now, I haven't seen it, but I've watched theists like Blake Junta. I debated Blake a handful of times, and he loves Bayesian analysis, and he tries to use Bayesian analysis to confirm that it's more probable than not that God exists and that God created the universe. And so that's why I raised that problem about having only one universe. I would like to see a Christian do a Bayesian analysis of what Carrier presented and show why their numbers are different, what their numbers are that are different, and why they're different. And because if they are fine with the analysis but have a problem with the numbers, that would be good to know, and that would move us in a direction towards understanding why there's a difference. If they have a problem with the analysis, cool. I do too. I don't think that Bayesian analysis is correct for establishing historicity of X or any single occurrence event. It can tell us in a broad way for what the probability of a given piece of writing in a particular style might be better classified as, a historical account or a fictional account or, whatever. Anyway, I'm off track. Keep going, James.
Well,
the problem is that, I want to just finish this point because it's crucial to what he's saying. So, Richard, what's his name? Richard, it's the guy who's the philosopher in the UK. He's a philosopher in the UK. He's a Christian philosopher. He wrote a Bayesian analysis on the resurrection. I forget his last name. I had it and I forgot it. But his name is Richard. He's a very famous Christian philosopher. He's Eastern Orthodox
Swinburne?
Now. In the UK. Swinburne, precisely.
Swinburne, obviously.
And
Swinburne.
Right. Yeah. The problem with Swinburne, as well as creationists, frankly, is that they're doing the same thing. They're misusing the same way creationists misuse science, the same way that the Christians are misusing Bayes' theorem. All Bayes' theorem is an application of the general rule that Hume pointed out, that we proportion our beliefs to the evidence, and Occam pointed out that we should be more parsimonious with regards to the claims that we commit to. That's all that is in the end of the day. The fact is they're simply misusing the theorem to prove their ridiculous claims. That's my retort. Go ahead, David. I don't mean to.
I was just going to say that, I don't get into Bayesian theory, not because I don't agree with it, but my mind is more inclined to look at the evolution of this or that figure, that religion, that particular theological concept. And when you see it develop over time, it's so much harder to take it seriously as something that got handed down in this one moment in time, from above. And especially when you see it happening all over the world too. It feels like we're barking up the wrong tree when we say, and when Jesus said this here, blah, blah, blah. It's like there's so many questions in that premise, that assertion. And that's honestly, that's why I love.
There's lots of them.
Yeah, and this whole debate between Jesus Historis and Jesus Mythicist. At the end of the day, what I love about it is everything we learn in the back and forth of this debate helps us better call the bluff of anybody who says, "Oh yeah, Jesus. I know how Jesus wants you to act and behave and vote. Listen to me. I've got the whole scoop on Jesus." It totally demolishes it.
Yeah, for me, I'm more of an extremist on this end, even more extreme than Carrier. And the reason I am, because I think that epistemological methods are important. I think if you throw them out, you might as well just throw out all knowledge. All knowledge is inductive. All knowledge is based on evidence, as far as we know. Could be something else, but as far as we know, it's all based on evidence. It's all based on proportioning our beliefs to the evidence. So if we want to be, if you want special pleading in this case, then why not just throw the rest of it out? I just don't see that as being a very useful research program. So that's why I'm actually very much extreme on the Jesus historicity question. I think that the evidence is clear, so we should not hold his view, any view that he existed, unless you think, like I do, that Jesus is actually a literary construction. We can go into this, but literary construction, a mythic title, meaning God's anointed savior who gives gnosis to the world, and who is probably literary construction based off of the Apostle Paul. We can go into that, but that's not what we mean when we say Jesus. And to me, if that's what Jesus is, then just throw Jesus out the gate.
Yeah, this is where we're back to what I've been saying for years, which is if you took the Bible and you made a list of everything the Bible claims about Jesus, each individual claim, just boom, 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 let's make a checklist. Here's a CV of Jesus based on what the Bible says. Yeah. What part of it is verifiable? I don't know that any part of it is strongly verifiable. I think there are some parts of it that might be weakly verifiable, in the sense of, we were talking before about, Papaya saying, "Hey, I knew the daughter of apostles, so I met and talked to the daughter of people who hung out with Jesus." Well, if Papias were just a historian, and had cited sources with information, that would still not be enough, but it would be different from an actual Christian clergy person telling us how they knew the daughters of apostles. Because it's a great thing. If I told you that I met the daughter of I'm not going to think of anybody in the right time frame. I met Elvis's daughter, and she told me that Elvis did in fact meet with extraterrestrials. Yeah. That's where we are. Me and Papias know the daughter of someone who associated with someone else. So the daughters of apostles associating with Jesus, the daughters of Elvis associating with extraterrestrials.
Right.
It's a more absurd claim to say Elvis associated with extraterrestrials than it is to say that apostles associated with some itinerant rabbi. That's not that remarkable. But the problem is that
the Inquirer article saying that you talked to the daughters of Elvis.
The problem is
there's always one more.
Even if that got to the point where at most it would confirm that Jesus existed, that tells us nothing about whether Jesus did any of the things. Just like if Elvis associated with extraterrestrials, that tells us nothing about what extraterrestrials are like, what they want, what they did, what they're capable of, how often they're visiting, nothing. And so if somebody has a bunch of thoughts about extraterrestrials and they want to use Elvis to bolster those thoughts, then that's the same thing as trying to use the apostles to bolster Jesus. Even if there was a person, which is unremarkable that there was a person, what do we know about them?
Yeah. And the thing is, it's actually worse than that. And David can jump off this because he said this a couple times. As far as I know, Papias, we don't have anything by Papias. I think we only have something by Eusebius saying that Papias said. And beyond that, the first Bible that we have, the first complete one, comes from the year 350. Right, that's more than 300 years after Jesus.
Yeah.
The first manuscript is just a little sliver. 352 comes from the year 175. If you're being honest and not trying to be an apologist and say it comes from the year 125.
It's probably younger than that.
And no, I'm getting to it. And Irenaeus is the first one to talk about the Gospels, and we have a whole 150-year gap between Jesus' life and the earliest mention of Jesus in any historical sense. 150 years, complete black hole.
Yeah.
Between what?
So it's harder than that.
Oh, there's a complete black hole of evidence, he's saying. And I feel like I could jump on every single thing you just said and said, yes, and what's worse is blah, blah, blah. Anyway, keep going, James. You're doing great.
Yeah, that's where we agree with. Where me and Fitzgerald agree.
Yeah.
I do disagree with him, though, and we can talk about that if you want. Also, maybe you want to get into the pantheist thing. I don't want to just ruffle my own feathers talking about Jesus' mythicism the whole time. Or we could just leave it there. It's up to you.
You tell us what you want to talk about. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, so ultimately I ended up calling in because I wanted to do some criticism, not praiseworthiness of the show. I got your recent book, read through it, and I just think it's unhelpful is the term I'm going to use for this.
James, just to be clear, we're talking about playing God.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I've never bought one of your books, so I'm not going to use this as the way to judge everything you've ever written. Because most of what you've written seems okay. I just never read it. I've just listened to your talks. But the book that you wrote in question, the Playing God book, the chapter specifically on Buddhism and Eastern religions, I find the Eastern religions chapter a problem because it seems like it's mostly just stuff you could find on Wikipedia. I don't know why. Well, this is just
not sure you'd say that. It's based on like John Kingsley and David Drews primarily, and other Buddhist practitioners.
Well, that's the Buddhism section. Right, that's the Buddhism section. I'm talking about the other religions. I'm talking about the Buddhist section in a minute. But the other religions, where you talk about Jainism and so on, there's very little. Yeah. Like you don't mention Bronkhorst, for example. He's the leading scholar in Indology. You don't mention him. He does a lot on Jainism and Hinduism. And all this is free on. You could just look it up. It's all free on academia.edu. And there's plenty of things you don't mention. It seems like a lot of this, again, if you just go to Wikipedia and you just read the Wikipedia article and check the sources, a lot of this is just there.
I did not get my information from Wikipedia. No offense to the good folks at Wikipedia, but that's not where I go for my sources.
Right. Well, that's not my criticism. My criticism isn't that you use Wikipedia. My criticism is that it's not in-depth enough. It feels like it could have been heavily expanded. And it's lacking a lot of details I think are important.
No doubt. I mean, I was totally focused on the origins of those religions, and particularly the very earliest stratas of them. So there's loads more we could talk about, and all day talking about them.
Right.
I tell people the problem when you write a book on the evolution of world religions throughout human history is not writing a book, it's writing a short book on that subject. And that's why there's that huge, massive bibliography at the end. And for further reading, check out this. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I looked at the only scholar I found when I looked at that bibliography, when I went through the chapter, the only scholar I found that was of any note was Christopher Rice. I looked up his book. It's called The Religions of the East. I can't find it anywhere. If you look on Google, look up Christopher Rice, Religions of the East. I guess anyone can do it. You can't find it in publication. You can't find a PDF of it. So I'm wondering, like, how are you supposed to check what you're saying if you can't find a book on it? And I'm also wondering how you got that book.
Yeah. Christopher Wright is not the only scholar I took from.
Well, I know that, but I'm saying of that's not what I meant. What I meant is to say that of scholars that I found of note, that I found this is important, we need to look this up. Yeah. Which might be a subjective criteria, that's fine.
I don't disagree with you. All I can say is somehow I found it. Where I found it, I would have to, that would take a longer time to answer, and depending on what thing we're talking about. But
yeah. That's a very surface level criticism. I'd levy a more in-depth criticism of your chapter on Buddhism. You said you used Kingsley and Drew's. Yeah, Drew's article, if you read it, anyone can look it up, 2017 article on academia.edu. He doesn't actually, he doesn't assort or propound any evidence for what he says. He simply asserts it. Anyone can just look that up, which is fine in and of itself, but you would need supporting scholars, just like Carrier would for, say, his book. I don't really see that in your book. You rely on Kingsley. The only thing I could find on Kingsley when I looked on Google is his master's thesis in a 20-minute video. Otherwise, he's completely unknown in academia that I can tell. And I didn't see anything. You mentioned Beckwith. Beckwith is fine. I like his scholarship, but he's not considered authoritative by scholars in early Buddhism, such as Bronkhorst. He criticizes Beckwith. And that's because Beckwith makes some very, how do you say, he's very idiosyncratic, because his whole book is about the relationship between the Greek world and the Buddha. But I just found a lot of your chapter wanting, I guess is the term.
Well, here's the thing too. When you're writing a book on religious history in particular, that means you're going to get pushback from everybody who is associated with that religion, everyone who's affiliated with it, and everyone who approaches it with undue credence. So if for instance, like 30 years ago, if I talked to only people who about the historical Moses, the sources I talk about, I'd say, well, there's Thomas Thompson. All these guys saying, look at the evidence we have for it. 30 years ago, that was blasphemy.
Yeah.
Now that's the consensus, the overwhelming consensus, even among religious scholars. So don't try to be too hard on whether these guys are accepted within this particular subfield of religious history.
No, that's not my that's not my criticism.
They hate when you kick the tires on their religion. It's much more effective to say, what is it they're saying that they're finding controversial? What are they talking about? Yeah.
That's not my criticism. My criticism is that it seems strange that you use unknown scholars, non-scholars, biased scholars, idiosyncratic scholars. There's a large assortment. You can just go to Wikipedia and go to the works cited page. Large assortment of mainstream scholars that are nary mentioned. There's not even a mention of them. So it's just odd that it just seems like it's stacked. The deck is all stacked in one direction.
Well, I get that a lot, I guess.
I can't. I don't know. I'm not following at all, James. Are you asking why someone writing a book on mythicism is citing individuals that aren't as well known as some other individuals? Because how well known somebody
is? What I'm saying is, well, let me use an analogy. I'll make it clear. When Carrier writes his book, what is Carrier's book? Carrier's book is the support of the Doherty thesis. Doherty in his book adduces a bunch of evidence supporting his thesis. Carrier is simply uplifting that book, adding mainstream scholarship to show, as well as this Bayesian theory, to show that this is more likely than not. What I find David Fitzgerald doing is simply raising Drews, who doesn't adduce any evidence, he just claims something. And then Kingsley, who's an unknown
I don't understand how this is an answer to my question.
Well, I'm not sure if I am answering your question. All I'm simply saying is I'm trying to show an analogy. It seems like, I'm sorry, I am answering your question. I'm sorry, I forgot what your question. I think, what I'm saying is, I think that's not what he's doing, right? That's my response. I don't think that's what he's doing. What he's doing is he's showing very unknown, marginal people, and he's just ignoring the rest.
I'm a very unknown, marginal person. Yeah, this is my tribe. This is not to say they're crackpots.
James, are they wrong?
Yeah, I'd say so.
So you think that the people he's citing are wrong?
Yeah, because Kingsley is not an academic in the field.
So, for instance, why haven't you written a book Why haven't you written a book going through these and showing why these?
That's my point. Right. That's my point. There are books
your point.
Right. You can read.
I'm asking you why you're doing it instead of wasting time on my show.
I'm saying it's already been done. Gombrich has written books on this. Wynne has written plenty of articles on this. Bromley, Sujanto, it's just none of that's mentioned.
Every religious scholar has written plenty of books on these. This, on Zoroastrian,
these are not Buddhist.
On Judaism, on every single religion.
These are mainstream scholars. These are not
James,
Buddhist.
For somebody who has anxiety, you're fucking interrupting a lot, considering how patiently I sat here and listened to you. And then when I asked you to try and explain what you're doing, all you've done since then is try to badger. We're done. Have a good night.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, James.
By the way, anybody who wants to call and challenge David on anything he's written, whatever, cool. Challenge me on whatever I said. But when we get to a point where we're just now saying, I think you should have used these references and not these other ones, and I think, cool, go write your own fucking book. That's not what this show's about. Take it up somewhere else.
Thank you. I mean, fair play to him for wanting to put my feet to the fire. Because, we should be concerned where we're getting our information. But as you say, what are they arguing? How are they wrong? That's a better question.
Yeah, that's the key thing. Yeah. And he does think they're wrong. And that's cool. Yeah. I don't have enough time left in the show to sit here and start a whole nother conversation about where he thinks they're wrong. Because while we're happy to discuss this stuff, this is not going to be a let's compare David's book to every other scholar who's written on this and who you think he should have referenced and who you should. That's not what this is. You want to have that show? Cool. That can be a Cause I Wanna sometime where we can advertise it ahead of time as Fitz takes on all people on the mythicism thing. And you can get your super chat questions in for $5. By the way.
And can I just say, if I'm wrong, I want to know. So James, if you're still listening and you want to send this to me, email it me, let me know because I want to read it. I want to hear it. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to be less wrong, as a very wise man once told me.
Hey, it's Jimmy Snow here. I'm the executive producer on the line with a fun fact. Did you know 100% of the hosts of this channel enjoy eating? It's true. And if you would like to help contribute to their ongoing addiction, you can do so by going over to Patreon or becoming a channel member. There are show-specific, host-specific tiers. Those are awesome. But also, you can leave a super thanks with a special little highlighted comment. You can like, comment, and subscribe. All of those will help fill our whittle bellies. By the way, check out some of this content over here. Algorithm, what next?